Welcome to the Proceedings podcast. I'm Bill Hamblet, the editor-in-chief of Proceedings at the U.S. Naval Institute. Today is Monday, the 14th of July, 2025. Good to have you on board, everyone. In previews of coming attractions, Naval Institute will host our second of four panel discussions on shipbuilding this year here at the Jack C. Taylor Conference in Annapolis at 3 p.m., 1500 on the 14th of August. This one is called Correcting Course, Accelerating Unmanned by Bridging Requirements, Acquisition, and Fleet Integration. It's going to focus on the unmanned side of shipbuilding with representatives from both the Navy and industry. Should be a great conversation. All right, today's episode is brought to you by Booz Allen. Booz Allen delivers outcomes with speed for the nation's most critical defense priorities. Work with solution engineers who use AI, cyber, and quantum to help warfighters collaborate faster with allies and partners from the open seas to the edge of space. Learn more at boozallen.com/defense. All right, joining me today, my guest is Mr. Eric Wertheim. He's the author of our monthly Combat Fleets column in Proceedings, and he's also the author of the 16th edition of the reference book, the very thick Bible called Combat Fleets, published by the Naval Institute Press. Eric, welcome back to the show.
Hey, it's nice to be here, Bill. Thank you for having me back again. It's been a bit, and I'm excited to talk about international navies.
Awesome. Well, for our audience, the Combat Fleets column has been a staple in our pages for decades. It's just a one-page column every month. It's just the facts, always focuses in, used to be, it would focus on three different foreign Navy ships, and now it just does one. So we switched that a couple years ago. A good image plus the basics on size, crew, weapons, electronics, propulsion. You can find it always towards the back of the magazine. In the July issue, it's on page 92. And for the past 2 years or so, you can find a video version of the column on our YouTube channel. Those are short 3 to 4 minute videos. They've become very popular, and many of them have had more than 150,000 views on YouTube. So Eric, let's start at the strategic level. I want to just talk about global naval shipbuilding trends, because shipbuilding is kind of the theme for Proceedings for this year. Our listeners have certainly heard that the U.S. Navy has been struggling to grow its fleet and that the Chinese Navy has been growing very quickly. How would you characterize naval shipbuilding across the rest of the world? Maybe go from region to region.
Absolutely, Bill. And again, thanks, as I said, for having me on here. Naval Institute's always been a big part of my career and my life, and I'm happy to be able to have these discussions on what's happening in the world's navies. So I think Proceedings has been a very important contributor to getting the word out on this issue. And we've talked a lot about, there was a great article in the February 2024 issue of Proceedings, I remember talking about how the U.S. must improve its shipbuilding. And it hit on a couple of really important points. And I think that when we talk about this and look, it hasn't gotten any rosier for the U.S. shipbuilding industry as we compare to the rest of the world, as China increases its shipbuilding capacity and capabilities, and the rest of the world is really playing catch up in a lot of ways. But we do have some strengths if you think about it. So one important thing is recently is that China now accounts for about 50% of the global shipbuilding market. That's a big market, and 50% is a big element of that. But then if you look at South Korea, our ally South Korea is about 30%, and Japan is close to 20%. The rest of the numbers, France, Germany, Italy, those countries are in the 1% range, close to that. So when you get to include our allies, then you're getting to something where we say, well, now we're close to parity for that. The US is less than 1%. So there's no doubt that the US needs to be involved more heavily, and there's a lot of room for growth there. But I think in the meantime, there's some very important things to look at: what our allies are doing well and what they're doing right, and what we can work with them so that in an emergency, we can work with them to surge. And in the meantime, try and grow our shipbuilding capability. But of course, what we do in the US is very highly specialized. And, so I think that's also something to be taken into consideration. But it's very important, and you'll hear me harp on this again, our allies have some real strengths when it comes to shipbuilding, when it comes to weapons development, when it comes to training, when it comes to a lot of different things. They really have some great strengths, and I think it's important that we tap into that. One example when it comes to shipbuilding is Finland, which designs, I recently read, about 80% of the world's ship icebreakers and builds 60% of them. So about 80% are designed involving Finland, and 60% are built at Finnish shipyards, I believe is the number. So when you look at that kind of element, you see some real room for growth and real areas where we can step up with our allies and learn from them. And they can, of course, learn from us in other areas where we are excelling.
Yeah, those are great points and previews of coming attractions. So in the August issue of the magazine, we've got an article by a Coast Guard officer. It's one of the winning essays in this year's Coast Guard essay contest about building icebreakers with Finland, either having the Finns build them for the U.S. Coast Guard or maybe doing a mutual beneficial arrangement where they build the first couple and then we build some based on that same class. But that kind of partnership with Finnish shipbuilders for icebreakers in particular is touted in the upcoming issue. And then you mentioned Japan and South Korea, our allies there, and some of the capabilities they have. If you went back to the June issue of Proceedings, we had that great article by Lieutenant Gary Kim about how Japan and South Korea build submarines in particular, and how they manage their fleets and manage the demand signal as well. It's some really, I think, important insights from those two allied shipbuilding nations. But let's go back, just Eric, talk a little bit about. So obviously the Chinese Navy keeps getting bigger. The U.S. wants its Navy to grow again. There's been, I know because I interviewed him on the podcast a little over a year ago, the chief of the Canadian Navy. They're in a really a pretty significant growth period right now. They're building ships. The Australians are building ships. We had the Australian chief of Navy write an article that we published in the May issue of the magazine. Are most of the navies around the world right now in a build-up phase? Are they building?
Yes, what's happened is that after the global war on terror transition to kind of this global competition of main world powers, and countries were really looking at, it's very challenging to stay neutral when you see some of the aggressive stances that are happening, for instance, in the South China Sea, and things by China. So a lot of them really have been looking to the West. And as part of that, and after the Russian attack on Ukraine in 2022, what we've started to see is the West has really started taking notice and is massively increasing their defense funding and capability. We're seeing across the board, and a big part of that is navies. And of course, as you know, when you have a ship, it takes many years from design to conception, and from design conception, and then once it enters service and production, of course. So what's happening is that the ships that were designed and built in the beginning of the global war on terror after 2001 are now, their programs like Littoral Combat Ship are now wrapping up, and new generations of warships that have been built with entirely new sets of requirements for peer competition, potential war with a peer adversary, are now coming onto and hitting the waters. And we're starting to see that in ships, submarines, aircraft, and the technology is really, really impressive. We're seeing low radar cross sections across the board. We're seeing signature reductions. We're seeing very long range weapon systems, and we're seeing this integration across the board with ships. So even though we have some ships, like for instance the Netherlands has some very capable air defense frigates that are starting to get a little older, what they're doing now is building 500-ton, around that region, support ships that are full of missile tubes, essentially. And those support ships can go alongside the air defense frigates and serve as essentially an extra magazine as needed. So those kind of innovations we're really seeing our NATO allies take advantage of. And the hard part's going to be not just increasing the capability, but increasing the capacity to build a lot of these things.
Yeah, interesting. So let's drill down for a minute on some of the recent ships that you've written about, and I want to focus particularly today on frigates because the U.S. Navy needs frigates, and the Constellation class frigate program is struggling. There's there's some indications that the Trump administration might even zero out that program, or its future is in question, I would say. But several other countries are cranking out some very good frigates. So going back to last October, the Combat Fleets column was about Turkey's Istanbul class frigates. Tell us a little bit about that class of ships, its size, crew, propulsion, armaments, etc.
Yep, I have that right here, actually. It's nice that you say and bring it up. That was one of the most interesting columns to work on because a lot of times the Turkish Navy and the Turkish military is overlooked. They're a very powerful fleet. They're a very powerful military, but because sometimes they have disagreements across NATO, and they think a little differently than some of their European partners, I think sometimes they're overlooked. But they're doing some really impressive work, especially with this MILGEM program. It's really an evolutionary effort to build warships internally with internal design and not relying on your partners. So being able to do this independently. And I think with the Istanbul class, the national frigate, we've seen that. And, it's about, it started as a 2,300 ton, the initial MILGEM, the Ada class that came in, and now we have the Istanbul frigate, which is about 371 feet long. And so the important thing about these ships is they get better and bigger and better in many ways every iteration. So we're starting to see more VLS, more vertical launch tubes, better radars, better systems, and you'll see that the Turks are also working very hard to incorporate drones into their systems. Their future generation of aviation ships are really all designed to work with drones, and we're seeing that a lot. They're a big player in the drone effort, and so we're seeing that the Turks are really working with this, and the Istanbul National Frigate is an example of that, where you have a 371 frigate, and you have 70%, 75% indigenous production. So we're seeing that, and they actually beat it on Istanbul, where they got 80% of the production was independent in Turkey. So that's a perfect example of that, and I think we're seeing that. One thing that as a whole, it would be nice if there were, while we have independent efforts on NATO from NATO countries, it's also important that they share that capability so that other countries can potentially invest in those or buy some from our allies. So, for instance, there could be an export market for some of these ships, for especially some that of our navies that cannot afford to necessarily or don't have the capability to design and build their own. So someday I think Turkey sees that, and we're seeing that across the board. So that's an example of an often overlooked capability that we have, that our ally has, and that we're starting to see this and exercise in some of those ships. And it just recently ended service.
Yeah, and how many are they planning to build?
So it's hard to say right now because it's an iterative process. They're going to continue building along this MILGEM national program, and they want to keep going. They will announce sometimes this is what they plan, and it's hard. No one I saw in some of the things we talk about, no one has a perfect shipbuilding program. There's always these problems and delays, and so the question will rely much on cost, how much they're going to cost, keeping costs down. And I think also if they have any success on the export market, that'll help drive prices down. And so I think that that's one of the things. It's very hard to say with accuracy what a number is going to be, because especially when you're talking about 5 years, 10 years, the numbers always change. but they are planning on additional future frigates and iterations of this evolutionary design.
Got it. I hear spiral development there. That the
Yes,
Milgem is
absolutely.
it's a family of frigates. They started out what a decade or more ago with more simple ships, slightly smaller, and they've increased the size. They've increased the weapon systems on board, the electronic systems on board. These are now larger, a little bit larger and more capable multi-mission ships, but they're relying mostly on indigenous capabilities within the Turkish defense industry to build their own navy, right?
Yeah, but absolutely. But some things like their gas turbines, the LM 2500s, will U.S. sailors would recognize. The Seahawk helicopters, there's a lot of U.S. Equipment on there as well, but not as much as there used to be. And in the future, it will be less. And the other thing is that they're developing this, and technology is coming on the market that's been developed by Turkey and some of our allies. It's really very unique. So it's some of the remote control gun systems are quite good, and we're starting to see that some of that capability. And I think Turkey has anti-ship missile capabilities, drone capabilities, and we're starting to see those develop further.
Okay, great. So then fast forward a few months to the March Combat Fleets column was about China's Jiangkai 3 class frigate.
Yes.
So this is another example of spiral development, right? Because anybody that's been around for a while is familiar with the Jiangkai 1 class, the Jiangkai 2, now the Jiangkai 3, which is the type 054B class frigate. Tell us a little bit about that new class of frigate.
Absolutely. So this is in the 5 to 6,000 ton range of frigates. And to give some idea for some listeners, Arleigh Burke destroyer in early iterations is maybe 8,500 tons. To the newest Flight 3s, close to 10,000 tons. But so if we're looking at this Jiangkai 3 frigate, it's about 5 to 6,000 tons, and it has similar armament to the Jiangkai 2, but it is better systems. So we're talking about better radar and better integration is what we're seeing. One of the challenges, of course, is that we don't know what their plans are for the future with this. Is this we know that 2 are being built at least, and we expect more, but we haven't seen any evidence yet. As of when I worked on the column back in the springtime of if there will be more, when there will be more, how many. So I think we're going to be seeing more. We just don't know how many is my prediction, but they do have quite a good armament, 32 cell VLS, vertical launch system, and for those HHQ-16 surface air missiles, which the Chinese have been relying on very heavily. And so those typically, when we see reports on that, the reports say about 40 nautical miles range for the missiles. The newer versions, of course, are rumored to be able to reach out to potentially 85 nautical miles. So we're seeing some real improvements here over the decades from a decade earlier. So we're starting to see that along with the YJ-83 anti-ship missiles that those ships carry, which have a range of between from open reports, 100 to 135 nautical miles, depending on which source you're seeing. So I think we're seeing some of those. They're very well balanced frigates, these Jiangkai 3s. They have sonar, hull, towed array. They have a back-to-back AESA, active electronically scanned array radar, for air defense and combat operations, and they have these VLS and anti-ship missiles. So it's a very well-rounded frigate. They've been able to build them very quickly, and we've been seeing that some navies, especially with off-the-shelf designs, have been able to really build things quickly. The South Koreans just recently built some frigates for the Philippines with anti-ship missiles and vertical launch system, and they were able to build them from the time of ordering to delivery in about 2 to 3 years, which is pretty impressive.
That is impressive. And also, I'll note that the Jiangkai 2 class frigate, the type 054A, they built 30 of those, right? And so now they're making an iterative step in improving that design to the Jiangkai 3. and they've got two. You said they've already built two. And with the Chinese, often they'll build a couple, they'll see if they really like them, and then they'll go into real series production. So like the Type 054A, where they built 30 of them, and I know that with the Ren high class cruisers, they're up to they built like 8, and then now it looks like they're going to build another 4 at least, according to Jim Fennell. They might get a good 12 of the Ren high class cruisers, and those are like 12,000 ton ships. Those are really significant ships.
They're very, very big ships, and I think that what we're seeing as a result of that is some of our allies step up. The Japanese recently announced some of their new ship program that I think it's called the ASEV, which is a new, very, very large warship that they're considering for the around by 2032. 2027, 2028 for in service, and we're talking 128 cells with Spy 7 Aegis radar. So, the Japanese are taking these threats very seriously, as are the South Koreans, and of course the Philippines.
Yeah, so you jumped ahead to the this month's column, the Philippine Navy's Miguel Malvar class frigates, and as you said, the Philippines outsourced this buy to Hyundai Heavy Industries in South Korea. So from order to delivery, 2.5, 3 years. That's pretty fast. And as you said, these are the first ships in the Philippine Navy that have vertical launch system cells. So that's impressive. Tell us a little bit more about the Miguel Malvar class.
Yes. So to give you some idea, they were ordered December 2021. Construction began 2023, and they were delivered in April 2025. And these are some really good small ships. They are. It's really amazing what the Philippines now has. We have a frigate with phased array radar and vertical launch system for air defense and anti-ship missiles. So they have 8 SSM 700 anti-ship missiles, which have a range of close to 100, about 95 nautical miles. And so, and then we have vertical launch for short-range Mica missiles, which are French vertical launch short-range air defense missiles. So I think right off the bat, we're seeing that this is not just a ship. Up until 15 years ago, 10 years ago, this Philippine Navy was purely guns only. It did not have missiles. What we've seen in the past few years, just in the past few years alone, is pretty remarkable, especially for the Philippines. We have these ships with a 4,500 nautical mile cruising range, and we have full up, capability. Now, the question is going to be, how are the Philippines going to keep maintaining these? How are they going to keep training up? How are they going to keep them modified, updated, things like that? So I think these are key questions, because it's very easy sometimes to buy these very advanced warships, but it's really important that countries invest for the long haul, the long term. And I think we'll see that, and hopefully we will. But of course, when you have a country like the Philippines, it's very important in all of these countries to have a stable funding stream and to have a stable training cycle. And I think that we're starting to see that, because up until the last few years ago, there was a very, very concerted effort by the Philippines to reach out and coordinate and work smoother with China under Duterte. And I think there's a very clear finding that it did not go. The Philippines did not get what they were looking for. And in turn, this is really part of the result of that. And I think a lot of countries are seeing that and turning towards the West in terms of Western equipment. Think you see that with India. You see that with some of the countries that are looking at where they should buy their new equipment. And I think that's we're seeing that across the world, is that which of the weapon systems are doing really well, which are hitting some drawbacks, as we're seeing some of the Russian equipment has hit has not performed as advertised, and I think that the West, the countries are taking note of that.
Yeah, interesting. So, Eric, when's the first Combat Fleets column that's going to talk about an unmanned platform?
It's something I've talked about. So it's so hard to, I recently was reading earlier this year, the Times of London had an article, and they talked about that according to some estimates, 70% of the casualties in Russia and Ukraine are now caused by drones. An estimated 70%. What a change that is from previous generations of warfare, where drones were just very, very rare on the battlefield. They were really for testing, if anything. And now we're seeing just they're dominating the battlefield and causing this stalemate where no one can move anywhere. And so I think that one of the challenges, that one of the things that makes it easier for the warships is there are these multi-decade programs. You have a start point, a middle point, an end point, and you can go in and write about these ships. The designs of unmanned systems and drones are so evolutionary so quickly. The cycle is so fast that what we're seeing, I think, and we talk about the future, is warships will really be trucks in a lot of ways. They'll be platforms that will have weapon systems, missiles, unmanned systems, electronics, and they're constantly going to be adapted. So it doesn't matter as much what your ships are capable of in terms of the hull. What matters is how capable they are being updated quickly and what kind of equipment we can put in. And that's where you get a system, why vertical launch system is so important. Being able to put all different elements into that hull so that you can adapt it as needed. And so I've thought about this a lot. Should I focus on a column on certain weapon systems? The Naval Strike Missile is a perfect example. It's in service now with over 14 countries is being, I think the latest number is, but it's increasing all the time. And there's a new weapon system that's currently entering service called the Joint Strike Missile, which is an evolution of that, and it triples the range. So what we have is the Naval Strike Missile, which was developed by Norway, one of our NATO allies, is now being produced for the United States. And in the United States, we're developing a production capability here in the United States. We have a production capability. Norway has one in Norway, and they're also working with Australia, so that any one production center is not a one target, you're done. Instead, we're able to spread these weapons production out so that you have a missile that's so key to our NATO allies in the United States, and we have production spread out to multiple assets, multiple countries, and multiple regions. So, and then the other thing that happens is in a wartime, you can then go to those regions, rearm, and go back out to the fight without having to go back to your home base. So I think we're seeing that, and we're going to be seeing that with unmanned systems, because in a lot of ways, the line between missiles and unmanned drones and other types of systems are blurring, because essentially we have one-way attack drones. It's not that different than a missile. And so depending on who is the operator, one of the things that we're looking at very heavily now is weapon systems that can be autonomous in the face of jamming, because we're seeing such heavy jamming and denied environments where communication is just very, very difficult, and being able to relay that. And so being able to then have weapon systems that can operate in those environments and continue on autonomously thinking is really one of the holy grails of that. The challenge, of course, is that what are the ethics behind it, which is something that a lot of countries are thinking about. But of course, demand is driving more than anything. There is this demand and competition. So, I mean, the nature of drone warfare and unmanned systems, and then unmanned underwater systems, unmanned surface, I mean, it's just incredible. And we're going to be seeing a lot more ships. Turkey is one of those that is developing essentially drone motherships. And the Netherlands and Belgium are developing a new class with France of unmanned mine countermeasures drone ships, essentially. They're going to be able to host a whole bunch of different drones to be able to help keep the warships out of the minefield and enable the unmanned systems to go do the dirty work.
Yeah, so finding that balance between the small, cheap, attritable versus the large, expensive, and exquisite platforms, right? That's a trade-off. I'm reminded of a Proceedings article that I think came out in about 2014 by former CNO Greenert, which was titled "Payloads Over Platforms,"
Absolutely.
which was a little bit, ahead of its time. Under his time as the CNO, the Navy didn't really move in that direction. But we just published in June a piece that was online only by Rear Admiral Daly, who is OPNAV N96, the head of requirements for surface warfare, about containerized, weapons systems on ships. And so that's been an article or a concept that's been debated in our pages for the last few years. But it goes back to, I think, to Admiral Greener's idea, payloads over platforms. The platform is less important. I mean, it's important that you build, a sturdy, globally deployable, space weight and power capability, et cetera, right? But then you'd be able to modularize the weapon systems, containerize maybe the weapon systems so that you can upgrade your systems quickly, when new weapons are available or when new sensors and systems are available, that you'd be able to do a plug and play thing rather than having bespoke weapons and bespoke systems that are built specifically for this class of ship or that class of ship. So some really interesting trends, I think. New technologies coming and what that looks like in warship design and procurement over the coming years is going to be just fascinating to see.
Absolutely. When you think about containerization and you think about what containerization did for the shipping industry, now you can think about what it can do for the warship world and the world of international navies. And you think about, well, you can then put containerized weapon systems. You can put anti-ship missiles or land attack missiles on any ship and turn that into a very powerful weapon. And what it does is it allows you to surge as needed, and it allows you to be innovative as needed. And then you don't know which are the targets, and it can work in both in the U.S. advantage, and it can also hurt the U.S. When you look at a scenario like Taiwan, where China has a lot more than just this navy they can put weapons on, and by the same token, the U.S. there's a lot more as you surge that you can potentially carry. We talked in previous in previous discussions about weapons that can be put into, for instance, long range anti-ship missiles that can be put into cargo airplanes and employed that way. So there's all kinds of innovation. You're seeing it on the front line in Ukraine. And a lot of that is being translated into these new generations of warships. When you look at the vulnerabilities of the Moskva cruiser that was sunk by Ukrainian anti-ship missiles, when you look at that and you look at how easily adapted within a pretty short period of time, weapons like a harpoon were adapted to a harpoon anti-ship missile were adapted from what we considered a air-launched or ship launch, being able to turn those into coastal defense cruise missiles. I think that's another thing where you're seeing heavy investment from our smaller NATO allies, Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and a lot of our smaller countries are investing in coastal defense cruise missiles. Estonia recently brought some what's called Blue Spear anti-ship missiles, I believe, and we're seeing the Naval Strike Missile get turned into coastal defense cruise missiles by Poland.
Right.
And what that does is it makes it that in Europe, and by the same token, Taiwan can do the same thing by as they're getting more Harpoon anti-ship missiles, being able to the porcupine strategy, make it very hard to capture, or in the Baltic area, make it very, very hard to leave port, because once they leave, they immediately are within range of these Allied anti-ship missiles.
Yeah. I just point out, I tell everyone who will listen to me rant about the Ukrainian Magura 5, which is an unmanned drone ship. It's about the size of a Boston whaler, probably a 24-foot or so Boston whaler. I think they've got different sizes of them, but that unmanned surface vessel has just turned into an incredible sea denial capability for the Ukrainians. The Ukrainian Navy doesn't really exist as a navy, but because of these small unmanned surface vessels, they've been essentially able to deny the entire Black Sea to the Russian Black Sea Fleet, which, I would have rooted for or predicted, much greater success from the Russian Black Sea Fleet than we've seen in the last 3.5 years of combat. So, well, Eric, we're running out of time. Always a great conversation with you. Any saved rounds before we sign off?
No, I think it's just I'm happy that we're able to talk about some of the contributions of our allies. They're doing some really great work, some great development, and it's great to see where those things are going. I think we're going to see more coordination and more teamwork among the allies in the Pacific and the Atlantic as well.
Yeah, great point. Great point. All right, my guest today has been Eric Wertheim. He's the author of the monthly Combat Fleets column in Proceedings. Eric, thanks again for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
All right, this episode was brought to you by Booz Allen. Booz Allen delivers outcomes with speed for the nation's most critical defense priorities. Work with solution engineers who use AI, cyber, and quantum to help warfighters collaborate faster with allies and partners from the open seas to the edge of space. Learn more at boozallen.com/defense. And until next episode, remember, victory begins at the Naval Institute.